Hey guys, welcome to lesson 11.4 day 1. Lesson 11.4 is a little bit tricky, so we're going to spend this whole week on it. We're going to have 11.4 day 1, which focuses on one topic, 11.4 day 2, which focuses on the second topic, and then 11.4 day 3 is just going to be review of the two separate topics, okay? So it is a little tricky, but stick with me, follow through the examples, and just don't fall behind on your homework, because if you fall behind, then you are going to start to get confused. So today we're going to be focusing on multiplication and division with rational expressions. Remember, this was even on our quiz. When we say rational expressions, this is just a mathematical way of saying fractions, okay? So we're just multiplying and dividing with fractions today. It's just going to get a little bit harder because the fractions are going to have letters in them. There's going to be like x plus 2, things like that. So let's start with a little bit of review, because again, we're just multiplying and dividing fractions. So this should be something that is familiar to all of you. Here in example 1, 2/5 times 1/7. When we are multiplying fractions, we just multiply the numerators straight across. So we get 2. We multiply the denominators straight across, and we get 35. If we can simplify, we do, but there's nothing to simplify. So my final answer for number 1 would be 2/35. Nice and simple, right? Here in example 2, I have 1/4 divided by 3. So remember, we can never actually divide fractions. Okay, so we're going to have to fix that here in a moment. But the first thing is, how do I turn this 3 into a fraction? You can turn any whole number into a fraction by putting it over 1. So now I really have 1/4 divided by 3/1. Now again, think back to middle school and what you guys did there, and we cannot divide our fractions, so we end up keeping the 1/4, and then I flip my second fraction to 1/3. So instead of 3/1, I do 1/3. And then instead of division, I have multiplication. So now we can do the same thing that we did in example 1. I just multiply my numerators and I get 1. I multiply my denominators and I get 12. There's nothing for me to simplify, so there's my final answer. Okay, guys? Now this is just review, but hopefully it is ringing some bells, because we're going to apply these same rules now to harder problems. So here are the steps for how to multiply. We just did those examples, but to give you some concrete steps, now that we're working with more difficult fractions, the first thing you want to do is factor everything. Remember, our 3 main ways of factoring are going to be working backwards, difference of squares, and greatest common factor. Those are going to be the 3 big ways of factoring that we use. The second step is to simplify, so cross out common factors, okay? If you have x plus 3 on top and x plus 3 on the bottom, then you can cross those out, okay guys? So that's what we mean by simplify. Cross out the common factors. Step 3 is to multiply the numerators straight across, just like we did in the previous example. And step 4 is to multiply the denominators straight across. Okay, so here are the steps for how to multiply. Let's apply this now with some harder fractions. All right, here's example 1. Multiply. And here we go. The first step is to factor everything, okay? Now, there's really no GCF, working backwards, difference of squares, so all we're going to do is break everything down, all right? So 3a, that's as simple as it goes, 3 times a, but 4b squared can become 2 times 2 times b times b. For my second fraction, 5b, again, is as simple as it goes, but 6a cubed can become 2 times 3 times a times a times a. All right, so we have done step 1, factoring everything, which in this case is really just breaking it down, right? There's no working backwards, no GCF to do. Now let's go to step 2, which is simplify, crossing out common factors. Now, you can cross out anything in the numerator. It doesn't matter which side it's on, as long as it has a corresponding factor in the denominator. Okay, so for example, this A can still cross out that A. So if there's an A on top and an A on the bottom, it doesn't matter where they are, they can cross each other out. This B can still cross out that B, so we cross those out. Okay, this 3 can cross out this 3, so we cross those out. There's nothing else left. There's no other common factors between the numerator and the denominator. So at this point, we're just going to multiply straight across the top. So notice here in the top, the only thing I have left is this 5. Okay, so for my numerator, I'm just going to put the number 5. For my denominator, I have 2 times 2 times b, so 2 times 2 times b, times another 2, times a, times a. So I do have a lot more in the denominator. So let's go ahead and simplify all of this to get my final answer. In the numerator, I keep 5, 2 times 2 times 2 gives me 8. To put this in standard form, I'm going to put the letter A first because it comes first alphabetically. This would be A squared, and then just the letter B. So here is my final answer. Okay, guys, 5 over 8 A squared B. All right, so multiplying that rational expression out, we end up with 5 over 8 A squared B. All right, hopefully that wasn't too bad. Let's go to our second one. This looks a little bit longer, but again, hopefully you'll see it's not too bad. So step 1 is to factor everything. So here in my numerator, there's nothing to factor. X plus 2 is already factored, so I'm just going to write it x plus 2. I am going to put it in parentheses as a reminder to us that we cannot separate those terms, okay? When we have that plus sign there, it's joining those terms. They cannot be broken up. So you can't just cross out the x. You would have to cross out the whole x plus 2. Here in the denominator, 6x squared. Again, I can't work backwards or use difference of squares, but I can just write this out the long way. So I'm going to put 2 times 3 times x times x. For my fraction on the right, here in the numerator, I'm going to use GCF. Okay, so let's see what they both share. I have 3 times x times x. I have 2 times 2 times 3 times x. So the GCF, what they both share, is going to be 3x. So I put that 3x out in front of parentheses. Then I cross it out. And what am I left with? I'm left with x plus 4. Okay, so I just factored the numerator using GCF. Here in the denominator, I'm going to use difference of squares. Remember, to use difference of squares, we square root both. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 4 is 2. And then I make one factor, x plus 2. I make another factor, x minus 2. Okay, guys? So here is our fully factored form. When we say to factor everything, this is what it should look like. Now let's go to step 2. Simplify. Let's cross out those common factors. So if it's on the top and it's on the bottom, we can cross it out. So this x plus 2 can cross out this x plus 2. So let's cross those out. This x can cross out that x. So let's cross those out. This 3 can cross out that 3. There we go. There's nothing else we can cross out, okay? This x plus 4 is glued together. We cannot separate it. So now let's see where I'm at. Multiplying my numerators straight across the top. So on the top, all I have left is x plus 4. In the denominator for step 4, I have a 2, I have an x, so 2 times x, and then I have an x minus 2. So there's our final answer. If we wanted to write it without the multiplication, we could put x plus 4 over 2x, x minus 2. But there, guys, is our final answer for this problem. When they ask us to multiply, this is what you would get, okay? Now, in case some of you have this question, you do not have to distribute, okay? Do not distribute. Just leave it there separately, okay? Just leave it as x plus 4 over 2x times x minus 2, all right? We just want to keep it in that factored form, all right? So no distributing. We do not want to be doing that in these types of problems, all right? X plus 4 over 2x times x minus 2. Final answer. All right, so we've done half of the lesson, which focused on multiplication. Now let's do the second half of the lesson, which focuses on division. Just like we talked about on the first slide, the example slide, when we are dividing with fractions, we actually cannot do that, okay? So the very first step is to do something that I like to call KFC. Those letters represent keep the first fraction, don't do anything to it. Flip the second fraction, right? If it's 2/3, we're going to flip it to say 3 over 2. And when we flip a fraction in math, we call that the reciprocal. So we're going to keep the first fraction, flip the second fraction, and we change division to multiplication. Okay, since we can never divide fractions, we have to change it to multiplication. So that's why we call it KFC, just a nice easy way to remember. Keep, flip, change. Once we do the keep, flip, change, step 2 is still to factor everything. Remember, working backwards, greatest common factor and difference of squares are going to be our most common ways of factoring. Once we factor, now we're just doing regular multiplication like we just did. You simplify by crossing out the common factors, and then you multiply the numerators and the denominators straight across. Okay? So division is really just multiplication with that added first step thrown in, because after you KFC, you're just back to multiplication. So here we go, our very first one. Okay, guys? And notice here we have our steps. All right, so to divide, the first thing we're going to do is KFC. So I'm going to keep this first fraction. So I'm just going to write it as x squared over x squared minus 9. I keep it, okay? I'm going to flip this second fraction. So I'm now going to have x minus 3 on top, right? I'm flipping it, and x on the bottom. And then the last step that I'm going to do is I'm going to change that that division to multiplication, okay? So I kept the first fraction, flipped the second one, changed the division to multiplication. So I have now done step 1. Now let's go ahead and factor. So my numerator here doesn't need to be factored, so I'm just going to leave it as x times x. Okay, we're just going to write it out the long way. My denominator, we're going to use difference of squares. Okay, so they're both perfect squares, so we square root the first one, get x, square root 9, get 3, and then remember we make one factor, x plus 3, one factor, x minus 3. Okay, for my second numerator here on the right, x minus 3, there's nothing to factor there either. I am going to put it in parentheses, again, as a reminder to us that they are glued together with that minus sign. We cannot separate them. And then in my denominator, I just have x. So there goes step 2. I have factored everything. Let's go to step 3. Simplify, cross out common factors. Again, if there's a partner on the top and a partner on the bottom, we can cross them out. So there's an x on top, x on bottom, we can cross them out. It doesn't matter what side of the fraction it's on. Then there's an x minus 3 here, an x minus 3 there. We can cross those out. Please, guys, this is so common. These cannot get crossed out, okay? Because remember, this x plus 3 is glued together. It cannot be separated, all right? So you cannot cross out those x's, so you are all done. And your final answer would be x over x plus 3. There's nothing else that you can do there, okay? Please, 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 those x's cannot be crossed out. That is one of the most common mistakes. Okay, the x plus 3 is glued together. And we're all done. So again, I hope you guys are seeing that even though the questions might look confusing at first, okay, this is doable. You guys know how to do all of this. You know how to factor, you know how to cross out. All right, so I have faith that you can do this. All right, that's it. Okay, guys, we had a short little lesson. Here is your homework. Okay, so the homework is in Google Classroom 11-4, and you will see it labeled as day 1. Notice it is very few problems. Okay, guys, I only gave you 6 problems because I understand each one may take you a little bit longer. All right, so please actually put in your full effort to this. Don't just guess your way through. This is a really important concept for you to understand. You only have 6 problems. Give it your best, okay? If you have any questions, type those in Google Classroom. You guys know I'm more than happy to help you with some of those steps. Alrighty, guys? So this is what your homework will look like. Notice, like I said, only 6 questions, right? 6, 7, 10, 11, 14, and 15. We are only doing multiplication and division. So you have 3 multiplication problems here on the left, 3 division problems here on the right. Okay? Don't forget to follow your steps. Factor everything, cross everything out. For these division problems, make sure you do KFC first. Okay, guys? So, thanks for hanging around for this lesson. That is it for today. So, thank you all for joining me, and I will see you for 11-4 day 2.